Chapter 27. The Large Chest. Whenever Shunsuke came back on weekends, he would go upstairs and take out something from the chest of drawers and a large, oblong wooden chest. He picked up things like swords, scrolls of pictures or calligraphy, and small containers. Then he wrapped some of them in a furoshiki or a square sheet of cloth. Jiro fully understood why he would do it. By and by he made it a rule to go upstairs and watch his father. It was a little irritating to Shunsuke, but he would not drive him away. Sometimes he would even explain to him about their family heritage. In due course, Jiro was in charge of putting into the chest those items his father had taken out but not wrapped in a square cross. Never in his life had he looked into any cabinet in the house except for the cupboard in the kitchen, so he felt as if he were in a different world. Everything his father picked out from the chest and other containers were really curious to Jiro. As he peeped into the dark, oblong chest, he thought of his deceased grandfather, his great-grandfather he had never seen, and other more remote ancestors of his family. How deep his family tree was rooted. He came to look at everything in his house with different eyes. At the same time, he felt regretful that those beautiful treasures were taken out one after another by his father, such as swords with elaborately carved guards, small chests with pictures in gold lacquer, and scrolls of pictures or calligraphy mounted on gilt cloth. His father did not tell him anything about his actions, nor did Jiro dare to ask him why, though he well knew that they were to be carried away on his father's bicycle in secret. When the wrapping was over, Otami climbed up with stealthy steps. Putting her right hand into her neckband, she would give a sigh and ask her husband, "Can't you take this one a little later?" Her weak appeal was always ignored. "Sooner or later we must part with them," said Shunsuke. His father's response made Jiro feel inclined to side with his mother, but when he turned his eyes to Shunsuke, she would always scold him, saying, "Go downstairs, Jiro." Her words only helped to extinguish his wish to stand by her, and the next moment all the treasures in the chest seemed nothing to him. As a result, it was only his sense of affection for his father that he felt at all. Shunsuke's secret business did not last very long though. One day he went downstairs to wash his hands. Jiro took out a sword from the large chest with great care. He drew out the blade half and was looking at it in admiration when he heard the footsteps different from his father's. He turned back, and lo, standing there was nobody but grandmother. In an instant he put the sword back into the scabbard, gathered the scattered articles in haste, and threw them into the wooden chest. He had not been told to keep it secret from grandmother, but by intuition knew that he should hide them from her sight. "Jiro!" cried grandmother in a shrill, trembling voice. "What are you doing here?" He stole a glimpse of her, whose face looked like a frog puffing out its throat. Not knowing what to do, he was just looking around restlessly. Some of the drawers were left open, and so was the large chest. Several wooden boxes, containers with decorative pictures in gold lacquer and blue silk ribbons were scattered on the floor. He was really confused. "When did you learn such manners, Jiro?" said grandmother, edging up to him. He drew back to the window. "Jiro!" she screamed again. His knees almost jerked up. Unless he had recognized his father at her back, he would have fled from the room without fail. Shunsuke was standing with a faint smile on his face. "It's not Jiro's mischief," he said, stepping over the scattered containers. He sat down by Jiro with crossed legs. Jiro felt a little relieved, but at the same time feared that something terrible might happen between them. Grandmother was still glaring at Jiro and the scattered articles by turns. Suddenly she stepped over to the large oblong chest and looked down. With her head to one side, she moved to the half-open chest of drawers to check every drawer. Shunsuke kept sitting with his arms folded in silence. "Shunsuke," said grandmother as she sat down in front of him. "I'm very sorry, mother," he said calmly. Jiro watched earnestly how his father would respond to her. To Jiro, his father had been the only intimate and trustful person so far. He was sitting face to face with grandmother, a little stiffly but well composed. His attitude made Jiro feel a bit sad and yet somehow proud, though he could not tell why. "I've been wondering about your behavior lately," she said to Shunsuke. "You've been involved in such a mean business even before your father's first anniversary comes around." And the old woman sank down to the floor. "Be a good boy and go downstairs," said Shunsuke to Jiro. He went down but was loitering near the bottom step with a worried look. Soon his mother went upstairs. Their conversation lasted long, and he sometimes heard his mother and grandmother sobbing. His father seemed to be talking patiently, but Jiro had no idea of what he was talking about, however keenly he strained his ears. Chapter 28. The Auction. After a few days, all the goods of his house were put to auction. On that day, early in the morning, several persons came, some clothed in Western suits and others in kimono. They placed valuable items on the floor of the drawing room and dropped pieces of paper into a card box, talking to each other in a loud voice. Most of the villagers came to see the auction, and some of them also put their own pieces of paper in the box. A stifling atmosphere hung over the room in spite of the large number of people. They all looked serious. When some of the brokers uttered an obscene word to make them laugh, they responded with a frowned face. Some women wiped their tears in silence. It was only Shunsuke who was standing there with a faint smile. Jiro watched the expressions of people intently. He was the only person of his family, other than Shunsuke, who was in the auction room. Though he was warned by his mother not to go, he slipped in the room again and again. He was anxious to know who would take those things he admired and how they would look when they received their loot. About 2 hours after the auction started, Ryuichi's father came in hurriedly. He was still in his doctor's robe. He whispered something in Shunsuke's ear. "It's so nice of you," said Shunsuke, "but I'll have to settle this matter sooner or later. No, I didn't ask anyone for help." Ryuichi's father nodded silently and stepped among the brokers and put in his bid on every article. As a result of a lot of valuable items were knocked down to him while the brokers looked dissatisfied. Jiro could not understand what it was all about, but was pleased to think many treasures would be carried away to Ryuichi's house. The auction lasted until about 10 in the evening. Most of the articles were sold off, and it was only odds and ends that were left over, such as a big, worm-eaten chest for clothes, a hand chest, a candle stand with a bent stem, an old hand lantern, and a suit of faded old kimono. When all the people went away, Shunsuke had a talk with Ryuichi's father in a low voice. Jiro was still lingering in the room, looking at the leftovers. "Why, are you still awake, Jiro? Go to bed right now," he said with a stern face. When he went back to the living room, to his great surprise, he found Grandfather Masaki. He was sitting in the formal style, stroking his gray beard. His mother and grandmother were also there, drooping their heads in shame. When he met the old man, Jiro felt a little guilty for watching the auction. So he was about to leave with a light bow, but was called back by his grandfather. "You look fine, don't you?" said Grandfather Masaki, smiling. Yes, I quite agree with you," said grandmother to the old man with a faint sigh. "He's so rude, I'm really worried what kind of a man he's going to be. He seems indifferent to our troubles and has been watching the affair all day like that." "Really? Was it so interesting, Jiro?" asked Grandfather Masaki. "No, it wasn't," said Jiro in an angry tone. "Not interesting at all? He said with his eyes closed and stroked his long beard again. "Didn't I tell you not to watch it again and again?" said Otami to Jiro in a harsh tone. "How could you watch it all day like that?" "I was watching to see who would take those swords and other things," said Jiro, but the three adults did not seem to fully understand what he had said, turning to him with an incomprehensible look. Then he said, "But I'm glad to see most of them gone to Ryuichi's home." Grandfather Masaki drew a deep sigh and beckoned to him. "Sit here, Jiro," he said. Jiro knelt down before the old man in a stiff way. "You must not think ill of them. They are all kind people who bought these things from us. We've sold unnecessary things. You don't have to worry at all. Understand?" Jiro felt a kind of pity for the old man talking like that. He did not answer but kept silent. "Do you want a sword, Jiro?" said grandfather. "If you want, you can get one at my house. I have lots of swords." "I don't want any swords, but I was not feeling good," he said. It was too much for him to precisely express his emotion at the auction. He could think of nothing else to say. "Then were you watching it in an unpleasant mood, Jiro?" said his mother. "Kyoichi didn't even peep into the room, you know," said grandmother, while Grandfather Masaki stroked his beard again with a sour face. Then Shunsuke and Ryuichi's father came in, laughing loudly. Recognizing the old man, Shunsuke looked surprised and immediately knelt down before him. His posture was strange and funny to Jiro. It reminded him of an inflated rubber doll made to kneel by force. "Is it over now?" asked Grandfather Masaki, looking at both of them. "Yes, sir. I'm awfully ashamed of myself," said Shunsuke, rubbing his plump knees restlessly. "I was told about this auction just today, and was quite surprised, said Ryuichi's father as if to assist Shunsuke. I'm sorry to trouble all of you, said Grandfather Masaki with a bow to the doctor. He looked thoughtful for a moment and suddenly turned to Shunsuke. He said, I have just thought of this, but what do you think of my taking care of Jiro at my house for some time? Everyone looked at each other. Jiro turned to his mother, then to his father. He also caught a glimpse of grandmother and turned to Grandfather Masaki. How would you like to go to school from my house? Asked the old man. Jiro turned to his father instead of giving his answer to the old man. I appreciate your kindness very much. If you don't mind, I'd like to trust him with you, he said and turned to Jiro, but all the other people kept silent. It was far into the night, but Grandfather Masaki took Jiro to his house. Jiro did not have any idea why he had been trusted to the charge of the Masakis, but it was not a bad idea at all. He left his house in a free mood with his grandfather, but when he came to the outskirts of the village, he thought of Ryuichi and Haruko and felt like crying. All the way to his grandfather's house, he was feeling uneasy, with the pattering sound of his straw sandals ringing in his ear.